Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Counterclipping Show number 209 for February 10th, 2025. I have probably said 2024 at least several of the last couple of weeks, so I apologize for that. We are drinking Bullet Rye 95, bottled at 45%, which is pretty good, which is 90 proof for us Americans, and we are still clipping The Forgotten Battles. Still working on the Germans. I didn't get anything done over the week. So our topic tonight is filling gaps in your collection, and we'll talk about some strategies to do that, and additionally, what gaps are in your collections. I've got a few left, although this one's already clipped. What the hell's going on? Although a lot fewer than I used to have. So we will talk about all of that this evening. I might call the show early because I got a couple of things I got to do before a very, very early departure in the morning. But we will definitely go at least an hour. So, Bullet Rye, totally works for an old fashioned. It's not hideously expensive either. I'll tell you what, neat out of a Glencairn, I'm not actually crazy about it. On the rocks, on the other hand, it is tasty. So I am having fun drinking this. Royce, my shelves do look different because I have rearranged a whole bunch of stuff. We might talk about that too. In any case, let me remind everybody before we get started to like the video if you haven't done so already. Thumbs up, or whatever it is you're doing on the platform you're watching on, or you're getting what you're paying for here, Stigler. That's all I got to say. In fact, the money is going in the opposite direction because some of it will go to you as it happens. So, given what we discussed last night. Folks, if you haven't heard, the Chit Show has moved to Sunday night. Our first Sunday night show was last night with our very own Stigler talking about By Swords and Bayonets, which is coming out very soon from GMT Games. So we'll remind everybody to like and subscribe. There's ways to support the channel linked in the video description, including a whole bunch of stuff, including the Patreon. Big shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, without whose support and encouragement we could not keep doing this, and to our good friends at Noble Knight Games, whom we will hear from at some point this evening. Super chats and super stickers are on. I am guaranteed to respond to a super chat or super sticker post in the chat, because otherwise it is possible, I try not to, but let's face it, I miss a lot of posts. So, in any case, I mean, to some extent, I guess I could start with this, but before we get into that, I got to pull this up. Hold on a second. We are grievously unprepared this evening, obviously. We might talk about the shelf rearrangement, although I've talked about it before when I did it, so we might be very brief in that regard. So there we go. All right. So before we go any further, let's say hello to Aaron Dennis, Alistair Logie, Bill Simone, Charles Latorre, Daniel Silverthorne, Dave Poirier, David Imperato, David Zell, Doug Blayart, E4 Airman from sunny Southwest Ohio. Don't know what the weather was like down there. It was cold and gross here today. Ed Holtzman, Fidelis, Grognard, Rich, HUN644 New, the legend himself, Fucko was in the house. James Conway, Jeff Anderson, Jeff Beeler, Jeff Edwards, Jeff T, Joe Hammond, Joe Okabayashi, Joe Perez, John Clark, Jonathan Dyer, Ken Hartland. Ken, thanks for stopping by. Lee Grant, Mark McNair, Mark Hodgkinson, Marty Sample is here. Meandering Mike is in the house. Michael Evanzini, Panzer Division Lair, Paul Dangle, Perry Sparopoulos, Ray Garby, Royce, Stacking Limit is here. Stigler is here. Tim Zales, Tony Mammal, Vincery, Will GM for Food, and William Aarons. I apologize to anyone that I have missed. And I clearly have. Lee Grant, thanks so much for the, that's good. Great to hear that that's good. My procedure, which was a routine procedure, went fine too, which I don't even know if I talked about this. I had a colonoscopy on Friday. Everything's fine. It all came out great. So, I mean, it was unpleasant working our way up to it is the only thing. So anyway, book. I'm not sure where Stigler's going with that, actually. But thanks for the support as well, Lee Grant. And I'm very happy to hear that your surgery was successful. So, all right. So, Stigler, I'm not really sure where you're coming from on this. The shelves don't too many books fine. So I think we're just saying that there's too many RPGs back here and not Wargame. So one reason why I set it up the way I did was that previously everything was kind of flush with the edge of the shelf, more or less, right? Now everything is flush with the back of the shelf so that I can do things like modify the display based on the topic of the evening for specific shows, which I did during the Columbia Games interview that we did a couple of weeks ago with Grant Dalglish. So check that out if you're not clear what I'm talking about, but I'm pretty sure everybody got it at this point. So, all right, Will GM for Food is moving to Ohio. Where in Ohio? Because if you're up here, we got some things for you to do. So, Dan had one of these, that is, the other day as well. Or not the other day, but a couple of months ago, and his was all fine too. So that's all good. So, in any case, what else do we have here? I don't have any actual news for the week. Nothing new arrived. Is that actually true? It is. It isn't. But no new war games are there. The idea is for this to all be Traveler. However, I don't have quite enough Traveler to fill it up. So right now, top shelf, which you cannot see, Traveler. Next shelf down, this shelf right here, Traveler. All Traveler. Only about a third Traveler so far. We'll fix that. I'm not counting 2300 as part of Traveler for the purposes of that conversation, but it does normally get shelved with the Traveler stuff. So, well, we're getting old. Vicky, welcome back to the show. Thanks for stopping by. So, I might have some RPG news. I hope to have some RPG news at some point this year. Let me put it that way. Well, actually, yeah, good catch, Will GM for Food. I have a lot more Traveler holes than I do Wargaming holes at this point. A lot of the things that I had, like, say, series that I'm into, I had managed to... Really? Well, that's bullshit. That said, I have no particular advice. But I've got most of Game Designers Workshop Traveler output, aside from like the one-off things like the calendar and maybe there's a t-shirt or two and that kind of thing. I don't have that kind of stuff. Although I do have a Traveler t-shirt from GDW, but it's from the new era rather than the classic or Mega Traveler eras. And I've got a decent chunk of the stuff that Mongoose has done as well, but there's 3 times as much Mongoose Traveler First Edition that came out than I have. So that is a big and obvious gap. That said, I don't care too much, because that's not the version of Traveler I would be running if I were running Traveler right now. There's nothing wrong, however, with Mongoose Traveler First Edition. It is perfectly good. It's just not as attractive as the current Second Edition in terms of layout and binding quality and all that stuff. There's more than I got, but I got a lot. I'm missing... I completed the Alien modules. I have all 8 that they did for Classic Traveler. I have most of the adventures, most of the supplements, all of the double adventures, but I am missing a couple of each of those, and I'm missing the first 5 issues of the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society. So, any case, there's a lot of these, though, and a lot of them are really small press, which I would not have known except that an old gaming buddy of mine from the 90s is now super duper in, and has been for a while, super duper into 18xx games, and has even designed at least one. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years. And just from talking to him, there's a lot of them that are really small press and really quite hard to get. So, yeah, John's got a good bunch of stuff as well. I might have more to say about this at some point, actually, because I actually don't think that they quite captured the Little Black Book look because of the golden ratio. If you look at the old, you like take a look at an image of one of the old Traveler Little Black Books from Game Designers Workshop, and they kind of where that little bar is, for example, conforms to the golden ratio. Mongoose's doesn't, and as such, it looks a little weird and slightly off, in my opinion. That said, that is an incredibly minor complaint, so I don't care too much. And I'm talking about the first edition stuff, not the second edition stuff. And even though the first edition stuff, they had quite a bit of stuff that just had art on the covers, but they did a lot of stuff with plain black covers as well. So, Board Gaming Geezer, I don't believe that you have missed very much. Before we go much farther here, now next week, by the way, I will have I am not 100% on a show for next week because of the possibility of having super crappy internet at Winterfest. I'll be at Winterfest next Monday. So we'll see how that goes. At this time, I am planning on having a show next Monday. I'm going to throw a link to the Ardwulf's Lair Discord community into the chat in case anybody is not in there yet. So hop on in. Plenty of stuff going on. People organizing games. There's rooms for people to play games if you use it Vassal or whatever. So that's not a terrible idea. I do have my verbal tics that I go through regularly. Let me put it that way. I think everybody does. But I definitely do. Okay, so there's two different versions of Dark Nebula. There might actually be a Ziploc version too, but I don't have that and I've never seen it. There was one in the digest size small box. That's the Series 120 box that Ray Garby is talking about here. They redid most of the Series 120 Traveler items, including Mayday Snapshot, and Dark Nebula. Was there another one? No, that was basically it. In a regular size 1-inch bookcase box. So as Mike points out, I didn't even know that it was it's obviously an edition. But for example, forget whether it's Mayday or Snapshot. I think it's Mayday. They actually sold Mayday in a Ziploc as well. And I'm not sure about Snapshot because I don't have that either. But otherwise, I have both versions of both the little box and the larger box versions of both of those games. I don't have the Series 120 of Dark Nebula, which who cares? I don't care about that. I would just as soon play. It's essentially the same game as Imperium anyway. I would just as soon play Imperium as play Dark Nebula. So it's not like I need an extra copy to be a play copy or anything like that. I don't care too much. One of the ways that we fill these gaps in collections, I was talking to somebody the other night about this on the phone, actually. One of the ways that we fill gaps in collections is, of course, to go to eBay or Noble Knight or whoever. And those are certainly places where you can find a lot of product, right? Particularly if it's a relatively hard to get product. But another way to do it is to buy stuff from individuals, right? A lot of times, on any number of occasions, at some kind of convention, there has been some kind of deal made for a trade or a buy or something like that, and I have walked out with a variety of different things. Thank you, Jeffrey. Much appreciated. That seldom happens, but I do appreciate it when it does. And I probably should move it so it's somewhere else on the screen, but it hardly ever comes up, so... That's interesting. I don't know why you would need that many extra counters, but cool, I guess. Another way that back in the day when this was a thing you could do at Origins, I bought a lot of stuff through that Origins auction. And Bill Hetfield, welcome back. Thanks for stopping by. Marty says, and I know other people in this situation too. Marty sells a bunch of stuff at conventions. Marty, I think you brought some stuff last year too. To WBC, from what I recall. And that is something that was happening at Compass Expo, and then they kind of clamped down on it for space reasons, I think, last year. And because I didn't go last year, I don't know what the actual situation is. But like at Compass Expo, there were a lot of people selling stuff. And I bought I walked out with quite a few things. I think I took two boxes or maybe 3 boxes of games up to sell. And I came home with the same 3 boxes full of stuff that I didn't have. Origins used to have a really great games auction. And I've talked about this before, that for legal reasons here in Ohio, they were forced to stop doing that unless they wanted to hire a professional auctioneer, which they actually did at least once, but it was a fiasco. It was like you had... in the old days, before they did this, they passed this silly law. You could just, go in the auction, and the people you would see doing the auctioneering were like game industry people, right? They were mostly RPG people, but all those guys played a lot of war games too. And I got a lot of SPI stuff and GDW stuff and a variety of other things over the years. War games, RPGs, those were the parts of the auctions that I would haunt like the entire time. There were also other segments where they would do miniatures or family games or computer games or whatever, and I didn't spend much time in there at the time. But we don't have that. Essentially, this is correct. And like I said, I've talked about it before. It's now a felony in Ohio to run an auction, to be an auctioneer, unless you have an auctioneer's license. And getting an auctioneer's license is non-trivial. You can't just pay $50 and send a form into the state. It's a few $1,000s to get the license, I believe, and to get it, even send the form in, you have to like have an apprenticeship, which is absolute. I mean, from the standpoint of people doing livestock and vehicle auctions and property land auctions and stuff like this, maybe this makes sense, but this doesn't make any sense for the person standing up on a stage selling the latest copy of Luftwaffe for $4.25. So Gen Con does still have a games auction, but I don't, because I haven't been there in eons. I don't know what the status of that auction is regarding war games. When I went to Gen Con last, which was over 20 years ago, I believe, it is 100% easier to become an ordained minister than it is to get an auctioneer's license in the state of Ohio. I don't know if Tony's being serious or not, but if he is being unserious, he happens to be absolutely correct. This is 100% accurate. So there is still a games auction at Consim Expo. Alan Emmerich was a fixture there, from what I understand. I'm not sure what they're going to do now, although I would imagine that they will still have the auction, since I would also imagine that Alan would be appalled if they stopped doing it because he had passed away. So Stephen Rochelle said that Gen Con had a good wargaming auction when he was there in 2023. Last I was there was the last year it was in Milwaukee, which was like 2003 or something like that. That sounds approximately correct. I mean, this is to be expected, but there was always, when I was doing the Origins auctions, which I mean, that's what was the drag for me to get me down there at all. I would go in to go to the auction, and I would sit whenever they were doing RPGs or war games, I would be in the auction watching what they were doing, because even if I wasn't necessarily interested in buying things that they were selling at that particular instant, there were all kinds of cool little anecdotes from people. Like somebody mentioned that Frank Mentzner used to run the Gen. I don't know about run, but he was one of the auctioneers at Origins as well. And for all I know, Frank's still doing it at Gen Con. But estate sales, garage sales, flea markets is another thing to pick up. Now, if you're looking for something specific, well, garage sales and flea markets are probably not where you're going to find those things, but A, you never know, and B, you might end up with stuff that you can flip so that you can then take that money and turn around and go buy the thing that you really wanted, right? So, Marty says you can look at the Gen Con auction lot list. I don't have any idea how that works anymore. What's the line between hoarding and collecting? I don't know, but I feel like I'm skirting a little bit closer to that line than I would like to. There are many respects. Ohio is not the most backward state, but there are many respects in which this is also 100% accurate. So Brant says there's talk of a consignment store at Origins this year. I mean, cool, but they have done that before, and it wasn't... I did not like it as much as the auction experience, let me put it that way. But at the same time, if that's what, the legal requirement that they can do that, but they can't have a live auctioneer, I guess that's fine. It's better than nothing. So, yeah, your complete alpha set's probably more like 600K nowadays. That might be a slight exaggeration, but not by as much as you might think. So... And sometimes I would imagine that Bruce Rife is I've never seen him do an auction, but I would imagine Bruce is the kind of personality that would be good at it. So I remember Tom Wham doing an Origins auction at least. Jim Ward was another one who would show up, at least at Gen Con. I have not had a lot of luck with this either, to be completely honest, but other people have. Jim Reasoner, who passed away 6 or 8 years ago or something like that around here, would go to estate sales and stuff like that, and relatively, with some level of frequency, would show up with boxes of old Avalon Hill games that he got for peanuts, right? So it does happen. I personally have not had a lot of success with that, but I'm not exactly trying very hard either. I believe silent auctions are not really auctions and thus are okay in Ohio, I think. The Buckeye Game Fest, whatever that they're calling that arrangement that they had for the last several years. I don't know about last year. Was sort of similar to that, where you could buy. It wasn't really though. There wasn't really an auction element to it. Thinking about it, wow, look at that. Highway to the Right at Planned Parenthood book sale, up unpunched for $8. My understanding is that there was considerable talk about it on the Ardwulf Discord server, and I think that it did pretty well as far as I can tell. So this is good news for everybody except Mark, of course. But that's not anything we can fix now. Or before, really, but I'm glad it went well. I did not get in on it myself just because I didn't really want to. I didn't really want to spend that money right now with a convention, literally this weekend, so this coming weekend. So Marty says Bruce still does the WBC auction, which I have never seen because it's held on like Wednesday or Tuesday or something like that, and I have not been there on that day. So that is just my tough luck. 2 copies. So apparently, I didn't know. I was aware of Red Sun Black Cross as early as the 90s because somebody had told me about it. I was not aware until the last couple of years that is actually sort of part of a trilogy of hypothetical World War II continues type of games that. Was it Ad Technos or Hobby Japan? I think it was Ad Technos that put out Red Sun Black Cross, but there's 2 other ones there too in that series. And I suppose, now that you mentioned that, let's see if... Yeah, Noble Knight does not appear to have a copy of Red Sun Black Cross at the moment. However, they do have a decent amount of stuff from Ad Technos in general. Of course, a lot of this is going to be in Japanese, and I don't speak or read Japanese, so that is of limited use to me personally. Yeah, so the way they used to do this, as I recall, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm saying anything that's total nonsense, is that if your item was like a minimum bid below a certain threshold, it went into the auction store, which is basically a consignment store. And if it was higher, then it would go into, or if in the auctioneer's opinion, it was not going to go for that, then it would go into the auction store, where it was just like a consignment store type of area where you could wander around and just buy stuff. And to some extent, that was probably a tactic that they used to cut down on the amount of product that they had to push through the auctioneers. So, funding your Origins trip. Don't make me laugh. So, I have gotten lucky at half-price books in the past as well, but that's increasingly rare nowadays because it's more like quadruple-price books nowadays. But in particular for games. But I've seen them have absolutely asinine prices on books too. I honestly, I still do. I am going to half-price books because I'm buying more books now. But I always go look at the games, and I'm always frustrated when I leave. I'm like, why is this Warhammer novel that I could go buy for $11 on Amazon right now? Why are you charging $80 for it? It's nonsense. I don't know what resources, and it's not the staff's fault, right? They're just executing the policies that whoever's managing that operation gave them. So, this is an absolutely a factor. If I have to go to 25 different estate sales and garage sales and Goodwills and thrift stores and whatever, and I have occasionally gotten lucky if I've got like 10 minutes to kill and hey, there's a thrift store right there, I will go in and check. But doing it systematically can take a lot of time, and if you're just doing it for games, then maybe it's not worth your time. On the other hand, if you might consider buying other things like that could be game related, like little tables, hey, you might find something like that. Folding chairs. There's all kind of game potential at the things that you can find at thrift stores and stuff. That said, at some point you got enough folding tables and folding chairs and stuff like that. So This sounds great. Mount Prospect is in the Chicagoland area. Am I right or wrong about that? I have heard very good things about Games Plus. All right. Let's see. Did participate in an estate sale when a friend died of COVID, got air superiority. Well, that's touching, I suppose. But sad too, right? So hate to hear that kind of thing. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty good. So, all right. Brant's got 2.5 copies of City Fights, but one intact box. I've had some weird situations like that too, where I had a game, Gleam of Bayonets, actually. I had the game, but it had come in a Ziploc. It was actually missing a couple of markers. It was otherwise unpunched, but I didn't have a box, and I got frustrated with that. So I ended up I haunted eBay until I found one with a nice box, but punched or, in otherwise bad shape internally. So I actually acquired a box for Gleam of Bayonets, and wouldn't you know it, it's complete otherwise too. So my copy of that has basically 2 copies of the game in the box, short a couple of random strength markers. So, I'm not sure I remember the ads for that. I'm not sure I remember that. But remember, I was not necessarily paying a lot of attention to wargaming magazines that weren't the general for a long time in the 80s and 90s. Because, S&T was around, but it certainly in my situation, it was a lot harder to run copies down than it had been when SPI was actually in business. That's these all just AR4 breakdowns. It looks like they are. William Aarons says that there's a room dedicated to game sales at the Niagara Board Games weekend, which I understand is a pretty cool event. Many games in mint condition, 5 games for $115 Canadian, $80 US, including Autumn and Sunset and PQ-17. PQ-17 is pretty neat. I can tell you that. Now, con flea markets are a different story because you're there already, right? On the other hand, at, say, Winterfest, there is no... sometimes people will bring a box or 2 of games that they're interested in unloading, and sometimes they'll sell some of those, and sometimes there will be like a little table in the corner of, general, please take this off my hands for a low, low price of whatever type of stuff. And I've sold some things like that at Winterfest, but there is no organized dealer's area or auction or anything like that. So, although thinking about it, when somebody, that one year, a couple years ago, when somebody brought a shrink-wrap copy of Case Blue, perhaps I should have auctioned it off. But he wanted $500 for it, which is not a bad price at all for for not only unpunched, but in the shrink-wrap Case Blue. So if nobody bought it for that, there was no sense of anybody getting in a fist fight over it either. Panzer Division Lair, Return to Europe and Escort Fleet, which I think are the others in that trilogy. Oh, wow. Look at this. Oh, wow. That's pretty awesome. So, you never know what'll show up at Half Price Books, though. Or indeed any other used bookstore. But Half Price Books has, at least in Central Ohio, has run all of the other used bookstores out of business. And there's a very good one in Mayfield Heights, something like that. It's up at Coventry. It's called Max Backs. That's a pretty good used bookstore. They have had games in the past. Last time I was there, which was a couple months ago, they didn't have any games that I noticed, but I wasn't really looking for games either. So there's that. I don't even know what McKay's is, to be honest. Mike Reed says it's near O'Hare, so that sounds like Chicagoland to me. Sometimes you'll also end up having a weird gap. Like I found out that the copy of Highway to the Reich that I have doesn't have the maps. I don't know that that's a huge problem for me because I have the decision version as well, and I could easily just simply choose to play it on the decision maps, and I would be pretty happy with that. So, since they are very pretty anyway. On that eventual day when I will do it. So this is true too, and I would imagine though that if they had that auction, there would still be people doing this. So you would see. Let me try and draw the picture from memory. So the Origins auction would be held in sort of a big presentation type room, okay, with a stage and all that stuff. So it probably would seat 200 people, and typically there'd be somewhere between 40 and 80 people there, depending on what part of the auction you were in. The wargaming part was not necessarily the most populated part, but there were a decent number of people in there. But a decent number of the people who were in there, like the whole time, would be people like somebody from Crazy Igor, somebody from Zaki, somebody, you know, people who own retail establishments who would then turn that product around and just sell it. And they would even say, we got a retailer special here because it's in the shrink wrap and looks brand new, when that kind of thing would come up. So that would absolutely happen. But at the same time, there was a ton of opportunities to buy a lot of stuff. I made a trade deal for Le Grand Guerre, 6 months, let's call it 6 months ago. And only then did I finally rid myself of several duplicate, as part of that trade, of several duplicate Traveler items that I had picked up decades earlier at an Origins auction by buying a big box of Traveler stuff. So, and that big box of Traveler stuff also made it a lot easier for me to assemble what I had too. So there's that. Mike Reed says Games Plus has a bunch of used stuff in the store. That's cool. For $6, you ought to buy it. However, there's a warning label on this kind of product, because the Rule Cyclopedia, like a lot of the old D&D modules, the classic modules, sometimes you will see them, and they will be the print-on-demand versions that you can get through DriveThru RPG, rather than the original versions. I don't know what this was, but if the person looking at it doesn't necessarily know what they're buying, that I'd be concerned about that. But for $6, who cares? So I would have happily snapped that up for $6, regardless of whether it was an original Rules Cyclopedia or one of the reprints. I wouldn't actually mind having the reprint. I think it's actually kind of a nice package. So, but a lot of the old modules are available like that too, including some of the stuff that was like boxed sets, like the Planescape box sets and stuff like that. You can get, I don't know about those specifically, but some of those old sets, you can get them all in kind of one bound volume now. So, Brand has 4 Rule Cyclopedias. Brand's a bigger fan of Back Me D&D than I am, though. Kevin Featherly says he can't see spending more money for a war game than he would spend on, say, an Epiphone guitar. $500, $600 for printed cardboard. I don't blame you for making this call. So here's the thing, though. Each and every one of us has to decide what our absolutely not price is, right? A lot of games I would consider absolutely not. And several factors go into that. It doesn't necessarily have to be this is the number. If it's over $306, I won't buy it because it's too expensive. You got to think about, I at least think about a variety of different things when I make that decision. But there is a point at which I say absolutely not. So something like Campaign for North Africa is an obvious exception, but I also got it for store credit, which made it much easier to swallow, right? I know that some guitars, I don't know anything about guitars particularly, but I know that some guitars can be extremely expensive. So I got rid of at least 2 different waves of D&D product in the past. I do have a decent amount of D&D stuff now, but it is not an earth-shaking collection by any means. I have first edition. I've got about, I can judge this by looking at it because the Kallax cube spaces are 13 by 13. So just eyeballing it. First edition AD&D, I've probably got about 11, 12 inches. Second edition AD&D, I've probably got about 17 inches. Third edition D&D, I've got very little left. actually. I did keep a few third-party products and like the core books and a couple of other things, but I got rid of almost all of it. Fourth edition D&D, I kept the Player's Handbook, a DMG, and a Monster Manual. I actually think fourth edition D&D is better than a lot of people give it credit for, but the publisher mishandled it in a variety of ways. Fifth edition D&D, I would say I have about 8-9 inches of product. And then probably another 7 inches of a variety of third-party things from different publishers. So I mean, this is a fundamental question that Mark Hodgkinson is asking here, because why is it that you want this product? Why is it a gap in the first place, right? Is it because it is a game you want to play? Is it a gap because you are collecting and you want to get all the Pokemon? Is it a gap because you think there's something interesting enough that you just want to check the game out, even if that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play it? I've bought a number of games for exactly that reason. Thankfully, none of those, that is not a reason why I will spend a bunch of money on a game. Those, generally speaking, are relatively inexpensive games that I buy. You know, I'd kind of like to check out American Civil War from S&T 30 or whatever it was. That was like $10 or maybe $15. I can deal with that. But if we're talking, about a lot of money, then I will squeal. That's an unbeatable deal. Going out of business game stores, that's a thing to check out. I mean, it's sad when it happens, especially if you were a member of the community centered around that game store, right? And that is this is outside the topic, of course. What is the use of a physical brick and mortar game store anymore? Okay. I'm not saying there isn't one. I'm encouraging us to think about what the question was and what the answer is. There is a community aspect around many game stores that the internet is not as good at filling that need, right? This was a lot more obvious back in the day before it was routine for everybody to buy basically everything on the internet. But, nowadays, I'm not... Oh, come on, Stigler. You've seen what... I am certain you have seen what copies of River of Death go for. $230 for a line of battle could be either Last Chance for Victory or None But Heroes. Honestly, they could both go in that range. I worked a trade for my None But Heroes, and I've just bought Last Chance for Victory when it came out. This was a fabulous book, by the way, the Q manual for the James Bond 007 RPG. This is true too, but presumably, if you're doing it for this reason, you're probably not spending $1 billion. But you're also doing it because something about that game that you read about back in the day sounded interesting or intriguing, right? I am pretty comfy with spending money on a game I will not just read it and or experiment with, but actually play, because the kinds of games that I buy in that space tend to be these big, huge monster games that take 6 months or a year and a half or whatever to play anyway. I'm going to get my money out of that. So I don't have a whole lot of hesitation in spending a couple $100 for a big game within certain limits. I mean, there are only a certain number of those I can afford each year. That's absolutely true. But fortunately, there's not necessarily that many coming out in any given year. We've had about 2 of those huge monster products come out in, say, the last 6 months that I've bought. Utah Beach was one, and what was the other one? Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition was another one. I can tell you that Mean Joe Green, the complete strategist in Manhattan, is still there, but I'm not sure about any of the other ones. There was one in King of Prussia, PA at 1.2. I don't know if that is still a thing or not. Drew Detter is still looking for the Haunted House game from Ares. I'm not sure which game that would be. And the Star Wars Death Star Attack ripoff from Dragon Force. I don't know what that would be. That was not something I was familiar with. Jonathan Dyer's biggest area is space, which I also sympathize with. I am very close to the bleeding edge on Wargame space in this basement. I mean, could I put more shelves up? Sure, but I have like areas of the basement that I want to do other things in too. I don't necessarily want the entire basement to be just games. So I feel like Barty says it's still around. So there you go. Mike Reed asks, for a game in your collection, after playing, what is the criteria you use, whether you wish to sell it, trash it, or keep it on the shelf? Well, if I think it was a good game, I have my personal feeling on this is that too often I have played a game, sometimes, and decided that it had some problem and then dumped it, only to decide later on that that problem is really not much of a big deal after all, and end up buying it again. In some cases, the original sell-off happened before I played it. In some cases, I hadn't played it, right? So that was oh, nice. Very nice. The hardcovers are really nice. So they're doing a very nice job on the physical presentation and paper quality. I mean, I've done flip-throughs of this, so check that out if you want to see them. But they are really nice. And it's a wonderful setting, too. There will be a video on Harn tomorrow. Let me put it that way. I think that the Tuesday slot, not every week, because I'm just not going to get that done, but when I have an RPG thing to do, which will more often than not be Traveler, but even if it isn't, it will show up on Tuesdays. And I do have one for tomorrow, so there's that. And that's thanks to Celestia, actually, because I got their new version of Harnmaster, and I actually like it, but then, like, thinking about it, I'm like, I'd still probably rather use the version from Columbia, the Harnmaster 3rd edition. So, Tuesday, Brant, you can do whatever you want on Tuesday, as long as GMT follows my instructions and everyone else follows my instructions to not release their information until late in the day on Tuesday or later in the week. So, well, Eclipse is... I'm not inclined to bet against Dick doing this either, but I do think that there was a huge... like a standard that was set for Gettysburg Games by Last Chance for Victory, in a number of ways. And I'm not talking about the game system as such, although I happen to like Line of Battle too. I'm talking about the overall package that you got. You got like it's a huge game because it's Gettysburg, but you got a huge variety of scenarios. With some of them had their own dedicated maps. You got exhaustive designers and historical notes and why they rated this guy the way they rated him and all that stuff. It is a just magisterial package. So even if I don't see any need for Dick to try to duplicate that effort, but I do see a huge difference between overall presentation quality and Last Chance for Victory and the previous version of Three Dog, which I think is disappointing in that respect in comparison to Last Chance for Victory. So I'm not 100% sure that MMP is organized enough to have a specific day on which they make the announcements. GMT does, but I think that is timed sometimes to reflect the fact that they're having an event or they're out of town or whatever happened, what's going on at that particular moment. So now, again, I was not really talking as much about the rules in Last Chance for Victory. There is a bit of a Reynolds is doomed. In fact, that's what I would call the rule, is the Reynolds is doomed rule. It is not, however, a requirement that Reynolds be doomed. You can decide to... I mean, he could still get killed randomly, but... And if that happens, then I guess you're covered. So the way it works is there's some restrictions on Lee on the first day. And if there's a certain turn after which, if Reynolds is not dead, you lift the Confederate player lifts those restrictions on Lee, which is undesirable from the Union's standpoint. So that leads to Reynolds potentially getting killed randomly, which can happen in the game. Or if you just elect to, at that time, pick him up, say he got shot by a sniper, and pull him off the map and give him a replacement. So, which I guess would be Hancock. So, I don't feel as firm about it on the maps, but I do, generally speaking, I don't know about the new version counters, but I do, generally speaking, prefer the GBACW counters over the line of battle counters. I think the layout is better. It conveys more information in a way that is easier to visually distinguish. And I'm talking about the. It's easy for me to say this because I'm not colorblind. Somebody who's colorblind might find those counters much less useful. But if you're not, then you can go by the colors of the various things on the counter, and that'll tell you what formation that the particular regiment belongs to. The winter sale, I think they're saying whenever it is that they finish shipping the giant 13-item lot that started shipping on January 29th. This is in the last GMT update, and I would look for it to happen in late February or early March. I'm not sure they pinned it down quite that finely, but that's my best guess as to when it will. That's my guess as to when it will happen. I don't agree with this at all. Now, that's not to say that MMP has never done a bum map, because they have on a number of occasions for a number of different things, and in particular, some of those old Civil War, some of the Civil War Brigade series maps are just bone-chillingly noisy, if you know what I mean. And I'm not a particular fan of those. But like the OCS style maps, those have honestly, if they bothered me, I got over it a long time ago. Let me put it that way. And you better, because if you're going to be playing that game for hundreds of hours a year, I guess if you're that annoyed with the way the maps look, you're probably going to have a grumpy time, right? I'm not sure where a lot of this stuff is actually going to go. I believe what we will be doing is putting 2 counter trays in this box. I'm using and this is Forgotten Battles. And we'll go with this. 2 counter trays, one for the Axis, one for the Soviets. I believe that will work perfectly well, I think. I guess we'll find out. But we'll find out when I get all the Germans punched, and then what I will do is I will reorganize them into the next tray. And also, the other thing with this is, with Stigler's comment, is that the Gamers is not synonymous necessarily with MMP, right? And I think Stigler's specific complaints about MMP's graphics all seem to come from the Gamers stuff. I don't know what the long-term prognosis for this looks like, but the Gamers have been allowed to operate in a more or less autonomous way as under MMP. And as long as that continues, I anticipate that the map art style will stay the same, and the counter art style will stay the same. I don't have any kind of problem with a couple of specific exceptions. There are some, for example, in DAC, there are some contrast issues on certain counters, at least to my eyes. But generally speaking, I think Gamers counters are fine. There are specific counters where I might go, but otherwise, I think they're fine. So. But then you look again at Great Battles or Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, and that stuff looks absolutely completely different from everything else that MMP does. I will say that I think that Azure Wish tended to have reasonably ugly graphics. I will say that, but that's 30 years ago. So I mean, what am I going to do? Write a letter in French and go complain? I do like the BCS counters. They are recognizably Gamers counters, right? But they are a little different than other counters that the Gamers have done. This would be, supposedly, I've got an order from Lock and Load arriving at some point in the near future. So we'll see if it shows up in the next couple of days. So. Well, GCACW was licensed from Hasbro, is what happened there. I think that came from Hasbro rather than from Avalon Hill. I think prior to that, there may have been at least a de facto agreement between Multiman and Avalon Hill, because Multiman as an entity was around at the time and was doing third-party ASL stuff. So, Heritage Games. I'm not sure. Oh, the American Heritage Games. Yeah, I'm gonna cut those games a little bit of slack though. So, one thing, somebody mentioned this. There we go. Jeff Beeler's talking about it. So this bothers a lot of people, but again, you get used to this. And if you think about it, I don't know how anybody else finds. Okay, I got this unit goes in hex 1116. Where's 1116? Well, usually I will locate row 11, go down 10 hexes, and then count 6 more hexes down. And the way the gamers have done the maps, where you only get the numbers every 5 rows, works fine with that. If anything, the numbers are a little too, I don't want to say it this way. I was going to say they're a little too prominent because they can kind of draw the eye, right? But at the same time, that's pretty much how I think a lot of people find the numbered hex they're looking for in the first place. So why not skip them? Could they make it a little transparent or something like that to maybe make it look a little less on the map? Maybe, but it doesn't bother me. So, Decision has made a lot of improvements in the last 3 to 5 years in this respect. I don't know about the counters so much, but even with the counters, I have not had a moment on Decision counters for anything that they've released in quite a while. Let me put it that way. All right, Alistair Logie. So I think the way Lock and Load is doing this is that they're shipping Blood and Fury, and then when they're done shipping everybody's Blood and Fury, then they go to the next game or package and ship all those out, and then they'll go to the next one. So if you haven't gotten it yet, I wouldn't sweat it too much. So Marshall Enterprises maps are pretty minimalist, but the counters are very fancy. So you at least have the benefit of having very elaborately designed counters, regardless of the other issues that might come into play with those counters, like the fact that there's information that you need on it that's on the back. That I still don't like that. Okay. However, having played a little bit of Labatt now, it is not as big of a hassle as I thought it was going to be. So, because the flipped over status does actually mean something, and generally if the unit is flipped over, then the information showing on the side that is up is the information that you need. And I'm being a bit vague about that because I don't remember enough specifics. So, this is true. Decision has been publishing S&T for longer than everybody else put together, SPI, TSR, and 3W. So, and again, I'm not arguing with this. I'm simply making the point that Decision has apparently noticed that this is an issue, that they're like behind the graphical standard of everybody, and did take steps to address that. I think their like rulebook layouts and player aid card layouts and stuff like that have dramatically improved in the last few years. The counter quality has also improved. The mounted maps are as nice as anybody else's, in my opinion. But again, I'm not arguing that stuff that they released in the 90s looks crappy by today's standards. That's absolutely true. I kind of wish this too, particularly for what those cost, but it does it's in a flat, plain white box with basically like a ribbon on it. But they do have an embossing thing that makes it feel a little bit fancier. So my normal preference would be to agree with Alistair here, but I also think that there is a certain amount of charm in the packaging that Marshall Enterprises is using. Let me put it that way. And everything is numbered too. They'll tell you exactly how many copies they printed and what number you've got. So all right, Mandarin Mike got his Blood and Fury last week. I'm not sure. I don't have that many Against the Odds magazine games, but I have noticed that their sort of sense of aesthetics with maps a lot of the time, but especially with counters, does seem to be different than everybody else's. And I'm not 100% sure I'm used to it. I think the only against the odds games that I've actually clipped is Bradley's D-Day, Monty's D-Day, and Rome Inc. I think. I might be wrong about that. But those are the ones that I've done some handling on. I agree that there should be a vessel module for APTO. But that said, it's out of print. There's like very little motivation for Decision, the company, to do that. But they probably wouldn't care now, at least with their current position on the matter, if somebody wanted to do an APTO module. So Kevin Flynn's got first victories in Australia already, which is good for you. Well, you guys get boned so often. I can't really feel good about complaining that you guys got your game earlier than we did in this particular case. I don't know about horrific, but odd looking I will buy. And Mark Mahaffey specifically has tended to have contrast issues. I do appear to be, at least at my current age, tend to be a little more sensitive to contrast problems than I used to be, and that might be part of the reason. But at the same time, even 15 years ago, looking at the Dark Valley, or whenever it came out, it might not have been that long ago. Probably, in fact, it wasn't that long ago. But even at that time, I was like, man, I cannot see where the friggin' setup boundaries are. So Clash of Arbs has some really nice maps. They have some really nice maps. They also have some maps that I don't like, but well, I mean, okay. And again, each and every one of us has the authority and indeed the moral imperative to make the decision as to whether the price point is ridiculous or not, based on what you're actually getting. So I sympathize with this point of view. What I will tell you is it's not really bothering me too much, but then again, I've only got 2 of their games. So, but that said, I will continue to buy the new ones, at least until I stop. Let me put it that way. I could decide to stop at any time. Ah, there you go. This is a good question. Drew asks, what is the game that you have the most different editions of? For me, here you go. I'm not doing any math on that. That is my answer, Drew. But I think it's a really good question. Because that does imply, unless you're just a rant, you just buy everything, in which case I'm glad you got money. But that does imply that is a game that you are really very into or have some really strong fondness for. I could see with D&D with some people having like a bunch of different editions of D&D, because D&D is one of those games that a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for. And me too, right? I have tremendous nostalgic fondness for D&D. I make D&D jokes and stuff all the time. But at the same time, it's not a game system that I'm terribly interested in playing today. I'm just one of the people that seems to be able to separate those two things. Did I miss a super chat? Nope, I did not. John Longshore, thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you'll stop by, but thanks for the support as well. All right, I think they just started shipping first victories, though. That's the thing. So, in the last week or so. So that you haven't gotten it yet is maybe not shocking. I also don't know what the specifics of their fulfillment are. Are they shipping from their headquarters in Colorado? I think that's where they are. Or are they having a fulfillment service do it from somewhere else? I don't know what the details are. So, and it's sunny. We don't get many ice storms up here. We got a fairly bad ice storm. It was even our gravel driveway was a sheet of ice. For the last several days until today. So Drew's got a lot of editions of Junta, which I have yet to play. I would be interested in playing it, but I've never owned it, and I'm not going to run it down without having played it. It's not that kind of game. There are other games I will buy without having played or not maybe having 100% of the relevant information about. Junta is not one of those games for me. I could buy it. I just would like to play it first. There's a lot of different editions of it. I will get to play it at some point, and it looks fun. How many editions of D&D are... Well, okay, so I track... I'm going to start with Traveler, because I can just tell you what the number is for Traveler. the way I track this, I count 11 different editions of Traveler. However, I'm being kind of fussy about that, right? So I count, looking at my list. Classic Traveler is edition 1. Mega Traveler edition 2. Traveler of the New Era is number 3. Mark Miller's Traveler, Traveler 4th edition, is 4. But then it starts to go all over the place because 5 is GURPS Traveler. 6 is D20 Traveler. 7 is Hero Traveler. 8 is Mongoose Traveler, 1st edition. 9 is Traveler 5th edition, 10 is Mongoose Traveler 2nd edition, and 11 is Cepheus Engine. So if I broke down D&D like that, which a lot of people do because they'll they'll pretend that there's some huge difference between BX D&D and BECME D&D. There isn't, other than the fact that BECME has a much higher functioning level cap. There are some small mechanical differences, and because the later product has like more levels, there's more monsters and stuff like that. So I can see having a preference. I just don't. I think one might get the impression that there's a lot of different versions. So I mean, even in just counting the editions of D&D is not sufficient, right? Because when they said it's D&D 3rd edition, they're picking up Advanced D&D's numbering system, right? In the meantime, there's White Box D&D, there's a Holmes Basic D&D, which then all this is in the 70s. Advanced D&D starts coming out in 77, 78, 79, I believe, is the Monster Manual Player's Handbook and DMG. And then that's its own thing. And there's eventually a 2nd edition of that in 1989. But there's also the Moldvay basic set, followed by the Cook Expert set. So sometimes that edition is called the Moldvay Cook edition. And then they hand the whole project to they had promised at the time there's going to be a 3rd set, the Companion set. So they hand the whole thing to Frank Mensner, and Mensner arranges to do these set of 5 box sets. Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, and Immortals. Immortals, I was not a fan. Let me put it that way. And that's kind of its own thing. They later did Rule Cyclopedia, which is pretty much BECME, but it's got a couple differences in it, as I recall. And then you start looking at, there's 3rd edition and 4th edition and 5th edition, and there's a 3.5, and there's a 5.5 or whatever they're calling the new one. So you can kind of get into the weeds as much as you want on this kind of thing. It just happens to be that D&D, because it's all around us as people in the hobby, and Traveler because that's my deal. So, all right. Interesting. Stigler's got only 1 or 2 games for which he has multiple editions. One of them is Iron Bottom Sound, which is one of my favorite. If it's the one Roger McGowan cover that I'm thinking of, that's one of my favorite Wargaming covers, if not the favorite Wargaming cover. Those, I wouldn't do. I mean, if you did, cool, it's your game. You do what you want with it. I wouldn't do this. If it comes in a box, I generally don't want to deface the box because, well, in principle, I buy stuff to play. I also like it to keep it looking as nice as possible, so I tend not to do this kind of thing unless it's like an actual garbage box that I would otherwise discard. For years, maybe 15 or even 20 years, I had kept my Harn, all the loose stuff for Harn, which is like a lot of loose maps and handouts and stuff like that, in a Beyond Valor box that I had spray painted tan and written Harn on. And years went by where all my loose leaf Harn stuff was in that box. And now I've got the 5 mailer boxes on the shelf with labels on them, so it looks a little less slapdash. That Beyond Valor box looked like crap after a very short amount of time. All right, folks, I'm going to try and get caught up on the chat a little bit while we hear from our good friends at Noble Knight Games. Let me pull this down, find the thing. All right, so take it away, Noble Knight. We'll be back in just a second.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right. Thanks, Noble Knight, for being the official sponsor of the Counterclipping Show. God damn it. I think I closed. Apparently not. Hold on. No, we're good. We're good. All right. I didn't get very far ahead in the chat. Noble Knight, I should ask them to create a 90-second commercial instead of a 30-second commercial. Kevin Featherly has pre-ordered the 7th edition of War and Peace. The old... So, how different is that on Kickstarter now, Kevin? Because I've got one of the ones, I think One Small Step to 2 versions that I'm aware of. I think mine was the 6th or something like that, and I'm very happy with it. Graphically, it's nice, and it's got more scenarios and all the stuff that I would want. So, Rand says that Immortals is an iffy box set. It was the right way to top off the sets in the series. I guess. It is very setting specific. The thing is that I also picked up the Primal Order, and that's way better. So Danny Gables says DCC is better than D&D anyhow. I would not necessarily agree with that statement, but I could easily see why somebody would prefer DCC over D&D. Well, we could say this. I think there's a lot of good in 4th edition too. I think there's some things some really quite fundamental things that they mishandled, but those are less about the game design and more about the presentation and the way that the thing was marketed, in my opinion. I mean, what do we call a derivative of it? So, if we talk about, now we're talking about the classic John Prados Third Reich here. So there were 4 editions from Avalon Hill. I couldn't tell you what the rules differences are between the 4 Avalon Hill editions. I think there's an unofficial 5th edition set somewhere on the internet, probably on BGG. Plus, we've got a World at War, a successor game. Do we consider that a derivative of it? Maybe. I think we can. I think that's maybe justifiable. But if we're considering that a derivative, then we have to consider Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun to be derivatives of Third Reich, which again, I think is reasonable. But we also then probably have to say that John Prados' Third Reich, the one not from Avalon Hill, but from Avalanche Press, and the Great Pacific War are derivatives of it too, even though they use a game system that differs quite seriously from the original system. But I've also made the case in the past that a lot of strategic World War II games are, in fact, answers to Third Reich in some capacity. And I think that absolutely applies to, like, World in Flames or World at War, to be honest. It's just very obvious with World at War because it's following in that mechanical tradition. Even something like Unconditional Surrender, or frankly, even Axis and Allies, I think owes something to Third Reich. So, Panzer Division Lair has 3 different editions of the Russian campaign, which especially now is very easy to arrange. Brant, thanks for bringing this up, and thanks for the support. And I guess I'll just talk about this right now. I've done this too. I did this for, I've done this twice. Once is for OCS Sicily 2. Mine is in a 1-inch box that is on the shelf. So what Brant's talking about here is we are doing Quad Fest at Buckeye Game Fest in late April, early May. It's the last week of April, and I'll give you the actual dates because the way I was going to say it is going to be super confusing. The War Room at Buckeye Game Fest opens on April 28th, and the actual convention, main part of the convention, starts on May 1st. So it's a full week if you're there for the War Room. We are doing Quad Fest, so I think we've got 5 or 6 different quads, all of which are SPI quads, but I think that at least a couple of them might be later versions of those same SPI quads, including Crimean War Quad and the 2 Modern Battles quads and the Island War quad, and what was the other one I'm doing? 30 Years War quad, and I'm missing at least one of them. So if you're coming to Buckeye Game Fest, it's a great idea to check that out if you want to try some of those old classics. And none of them are like huge time commitments or anything like that. So, all right, I'm still not caught up on the chat here. So Mo from Mo's Game Table. Mo, thanks for stopping by. Tunnels and Trolls. So Tunnels and Trolls is a regret of mine. And here's why. I've never played Tunnels and Trolls. I've never owned Tunnels and Trolls. I've never read Tunnels and Trolls. Okay, so basically I'm aware that it's out there, and that's about it. My only exposure, to the extent that this could be considered exposure, is through Ian Livingstone's book Dicing with Dragons, which appeared in the 80s, late 80s maybe. Might even have been the early 80s. And that's got like a general discussion about fantasy role-playing games and a small fighting fantasy style solitaire thing in the book. And then it goes into, there's like a big list of different RPGs that were available at the time. And then it goes into more detail about at least 4 specific RPGs that were like the most popular RPGs at the time. D&D, RuneQuest, Traveler, and Tunnels and Trolls. That was, to date, is my literal only exposure to Tunnels and Trolls, and it left me massively turned off from it. I think in retrospect, that was probably an error on my part. I actually think the Tunnels and Trolls nowadays probably has some things to offer that might not necessarily be available in other games, like the enormous quantity of solitaire adventures, for example, which they did for years before really anybody was doing anything like that level of solitaire stuff, at least here in the US. In the UK, it was a lot easier to like get the fighting fantasy books, which are also solitaire. So, Mike Reed says, Anzio's got 4 edition plus others. So there are 4 editions that Avalon Hill did, plus there's Italia, which is sort of the unofficial follow-up / expansion / 5th edition of Anzio. So there's that too. Alistair's got 2 editions of Triumph of Chaos. I've only got the more recent of the 2. I've done this too. I might. I've got like a whole bunch of extra boxes from various things, so I might try and rewrap a box or 2 at some point. I actually do have Breitenfeld. We could throw Breitenfeld in potentially. The person bringing the 30 Years War Quad is me, so I do have Breitenfeld, so I could bring it with me, and probably ought to consider sticking it in the box too. Oh wow, Robert Lane has also seen Dicing with Dragons. I recently reacquired a copy. I don't remember if I got it from Noble Knight. I actually think I bought it on eBay. That was one that I shouldn't have gotten rid of. The same thing with Jim Dunnigan's Complete Wargames Handbook. I had an edition of it. I got rid of it. That was dumb. There's reasons for me to still want that book for research purposes, and I ended up buying another one on eBay or somewhere. So, and of course, Mean Joe Green mentions an early Tom Hanks appearance in Mazes and Monsters, which is something else, let me tell you. I've actually read the book, too, believe it or not. The book also sucks, to be fair. I've never... I think I may have had GURPS Bunnies and Burrows at one point, but I've looked at Bunnies and Burrows, because some people will tell you that the first skill system in role-playing games appears in Bunnies and Burrows. I believe those folks are not correct about that. There's a sense in which, from a strictly semantic point of view, you could draw that conclusion. Looking at Bunnies and Burrows, I don't think so. I think that's a much less discrete class skill system and a much more concrete class-based system. So, Hackmaster. There was a certain charm in that first edition of Hackmaster that they did, I think. John's got the PC War in Europe. I think you might still be able to get that, actually. I know that Noble Knight has actually had it from time to time. I do not have it. So, I don't remember who the characters are from I don't remember who the characters are from Knights of the Dinner Table, but I participate with Jolly Blackburn in the room. I was one of the people, the fat guy at the table. I played that guy in the live reading that we did, and it was funny. And I think we did the gazebo. It might have been that, or it might have been the head of Vecna. I think it was the head of Vecna, which is really hilarious to be fair. All right. I remember somebody posted pictures of Arduin Grimoire from David Hargrave not too long ago. And this was another one that I was kind of aware of and never really looked at and never really knew anything about what it was other than that it was some sort of supplement or alternative to D&D or a set of house rules or something like that. This is, I do not consider this to have been a missed opportunity on my part. Let me put it that way. So, John C., thanks so much. Much appreciated. How many have we complete game of a series? We've never played a single one. Ooh. Do I have any like this? Yeah, I'm not sure I do, actually. So, OCS, I've played some OCS. I've played most of the OCS games, just not all of them. BCS, yes. I don't have the complete series, but I do have several games now in the Civil War Brigade series, which I have yet to play. So there's that. Line of Battle, I've got the 3 games that they've done so far, and I have played None But Heroes. BCS, I've played that. TCS, I've played a little bit of that. I really need to play more of it, considering that I have quite a few of those games now as well. The Napoleonic Brigade series is the one that I'm thinking of here, because I've got all 4 games that they published, at least in boxes, and I have never played it. So that might be the only example I can think of off the top of my head, with the possible exception of the Central Front series, which I think I have all of now from SPI and S&T back in the day. I need to get that to a table as well at some point. So I don't know if you noticed, John, but Zilla Blitz picked up a huge ASL lot that he did a video on a couple days ago. So we won't be hearing from him again. Or if we do, it'll be in the context of ASL. Yes, essentially, Bunnies and Bros is 100%, well, not 100%, not officially. It is Watership Down with the serial numbers filed off. But yeah, that's basically what it is. So, and Jeff Beeler, thanks so much. We do have one of them. I'm not sure. I think Brant is the person bringing the Modern Battles quads, and I think he has specific plans to bring something from each of the 2 mod quads into Quad Fest. I didn't overcome the only 2 quads that they did direct sequels to anyway is Blue and Gray and Modern Battles, and I've only got the first Blue and Gray quad, so. I've done weird stuff like this too. Not with Bunnies and Burrows, but I've done weird stuff like this too. Oh, so you do need to, if you are looking for Buckeye Game Fest specifically, we do tend to just call it Buckeye. You do need to search for Buckeye Game Fest, and then it will come up. Oh, this is true. Yeah, I didn't think of this. It's been a long time. I saw this when it was on television back in the whatever it was, early 80s. Yeah, this is what I meant when I mentioned that it has a not Final Fantasy, and I might have said Final Fantasy. It has a fighting fantasy style solitaire, choose your own adventure type thing in it. It's a little more mechanical than like a choose your own adventure book, in that you have like a character sheet and stats and stuff like that you make rolls from time to time. I 100% have played Middle-earth role-playing and still have some of the product. Not as much as I would like or that I had back in the day. Getting rid of that was also dumb, too. John, we are more or less talking about whatever people are talking about, so. So, Zilla did 4 videos on it. I've only seen the first one. Obviously, I am behind. I have at least played a little bit of this series in the form of some of the small, I think 2 of the smaller scenarios. There's 2 very small, like 8.5 by 11 scenarios in Kiev to Rostov, and those are the 2 that I played. I've got the Army Group Center stuff still set up, and I got to do something with it, and I'm not going to have time this week because we're starting to play GTS on Friday, so. All right. I don't know if Zilla said what he paid for it, but it's a lot of product. So This is a good one. Good catch, Dark Burden. I do have both enemy coast ahead. Now, you know what? I haven't played the campaigns, but I've played the first one or two scenarios from each one. I need some water here. So, now I've played it at this point. I've played Dead of Winter. I've played twice, actually. So some of I would assume Brant is going to have the answer to this, Dave, because he is the one actually submitting events. I am not, because my main thing is going to be whatever big game we play, and that is not going to be. I mean, it'll be on the list, but it's not going to be like you just show up and start playing, Forgotten Battles, right? Which I think is what we're probably doing. So, Jester was there not last year, but the year before. I think that's correct. The Buckeye is a tree that is the state tree of Ohio, the Buckeye tree, and the nut. It's a toxic nut. It is like a state mascot of Ohio. I do have the One Ring too, and it's really well produced, and I really like it. But at the same time, MERP really went out of its way to provide you with a toolkit. Whether it fit the world or not is kind of a separate question. But you really had all the tools to do whatever you wanted in Middle Earth with MERP. You really don't in the One Ring. It's very specific to a specific time and a specific place. And Free League has not really ever blown me away with the amount of support for any of their games, to be honest. So they have done a couple of things. Chris Makepeace of My Bodyguard fame was also in Maze's. That name rings a bell, but it's not ringing that clear at this point. Tony from Tony's Board Life. Tony, thanks for stopping by. Speaking of Ohio. Knights of Badassdom I'd kind of like to see. Word is it's awful, but I'd kind of like to see it anyway. So, all right, we are caught up. Well, I mean, either of those games can be run as a sandbox, but I do see what John's getting at here, because MERP, you can now where you put it is a different story. The different books are not necessarily uniform in terms of time period, but a lot of them take place earlier in the Third Age. So after the fall of Numenor, but before the War of the Ring and the Hobbit and stuff like that. And there's a lot of room for you to do things in that particular period. And really all of Middle Earth is open to you in terms of the stuff that the game gives you, like the different races and professions and all that stuff. Whereas the One Ring, it goes to a specific place in Middle Earth at a specific time, and gives you support for that specific place and time. So it's not, it lacks the systemic scope that Middle Earth role-playing had. That is both a good thing, depending on your preferences, or a bad thing, depending on your different preferences. So all I'm trying to get at with that is I think they're both solid games, but they are very different in approach, and which one you would like better is going to depend on how you react to the way the two games approach the topic. So anyway, I could swear I've seen at least one of these. Stuart, thanks for stopping by. I could swear I've seen at least one of these. This is actually a joke. Actually, you can get T-shirts with Ohio, home of the killer nuts, on them here in Ohio. So. This is absolutely true, although I would say that he could have gotten a quarter of what he got and still have a lifetime worth of gaming. But now he's got 4 lifetimes worth of gaming, so he's in good shape. I've got a lot of what Zilla got in that lot, but it's been, it wasn't like one big purchase. I acquired a lot of it piecemeal over the years. And I have much fewer of the historical modules that Zilla got in that collection. He got several of the old ones, and I don't have any of, except for Blood Reef Taro and now, I don't have any of the Avalon Hill historicals anymore. I did back in the day. I had Red Barricades and the 2 Kampfgruppe Piper modules. In retrospect, I don't think Kampfgruppe Piper's all that great. I'm not sure I would ever want to really play that. But Red Barricades, on the other hand, yeah, I was probably going to run that down had Multiman not been kind enough to reprint it, thus saving me the trouble of doing that. I've heard of this, and I haven't seen this either. I need more time, man. That's my problem. I have heard of this, however. There's also that Blackmore documentary that was done, or at least there's a Blackmore documentary that I think you can get on Amazon. Let me put it that way. That I would like to see. There's also a World of Darkness documentary that you absolutely can watch, or at least buy on Amazon. My reservations with Kampfgruppe Piper are twofold. One, if I still had my old copies, I would not get rid of them. 2, they are relatively expensive now, and they're mostly tank battles, right? The topic is a very armor forward topic, and I think if I wanted that experience, I might be better off doing it in Panzer or something like that. So, Kampfgruppe Piper 1 and 2 from Avalon Hill back in the day for Advanced Squad Leader. These were, I think, the 2nd and 3rd historical modules that Avalon Hill did. The others were A Bridge Too Far. There's Pegasus Bridge. There's Blood Reef Tarawa. I'm trying to think if there's another one that Avalon Hill did. Multiman has done several as well. And I've got several of them. I've got more than I need. And the trend in reprinting the core modules lately has usually been to include a small HASL module that appeared somewhere else. So, for example, there's a small island campaign in the latest printing or 2 of Rising Sun, for example. There's something with Rommel in it in the latest edition of Croix de Guerre. There's Soldiers of the Negus, which is Italians in Ethiopia, I believe, in the new edition of Hollow Legions. So, we can maybe talk about this at Winterfest, but I have not played Panzer, so I'm going by what people tell me about Panzer. So, and this is true. I mean, it's not like it's all just armor, but there's a lot of armor. And the 30s, yeah, the Buckeye Division, that's absolutely true. And they saw some action as well. I'm not positive. I do have Elst, Decision at Elst, which is the historical module for Starter Kit. And I also have Hatton in Flames, which is a full ASL historical, a small full ASL historical module that they did as well. So I've got that. Elst actually happens during Operation Market Garden. So it's British versus Germans. So I haven't seen this. How much time we got? All right. I'm probably going to call the show about 20 minutes early, just so we know. I believe I can talk for another 13 minutes on this topic. And I've said this before. I find it very easy to to watch, as long as like the person making the video is well spoken and their audio is at least okay and their lighting is at least okay. I find it very easy to watch a very detailed, rulesy war game get played on YouTube. I don't have a problem with that, particularly if the person is kind of narrating what they're doing as they do it, okay? I'm cool with that. I can watch hundreds of hours of that, and I have. What I've always found it very difficult to watch is people playing role-playing games on the internet. Which is weird, because that's like a really popular thing now. Don't ask me, but this is like a fact. There are people who do not play role-playing games, but watch other people play role-playing games on the internet. I don't get that. I feel like completely disconnected from what they're doing. The only ones that I've managed to successfully like get into and watch were the ones that who did it? The ones Voyagers of the Jump from Glass Cannon. They've done like 2 seasons of it. It's Mongoose Traveler 2nd edition. It's got Seth Skorkowski in it. Among and a bunch of the regulars from Glass Cannon. And I found that pretty watchable. But it's Traveler, right? So I'm like super into it. But there are other Traveler things that I've tried to watch on the internet. I'm just like, I don't know what the fuck these people are doing. I don't understand. I'm like not in their narrative flow. I don't get it. Whereas with the Voyagers of the Jump, I was able to like start at the beginning at least. But I've tried to like watch Critical Role, and I find it very difficult to get into it. It's very popular. Everybody likes it. Part of the problem with Critical Role is that if you like go back to the beginning, it's not the beginning. It's the beginning of when they started putting it on YouTube. They had already been playing the game for some period of time. I remember this too, yeah. And I watched this too, but this was just a short thing where I enjoyed Voyagers of the Jump. I appreciate that this doesn't work for everybody. This is where I'm going with this, is that watching people play TTRPGs on the internet normally does not work for me. For a Critical Role, what might be a better idea is to start at the beginning of one of the seasons or campaigns or whatever they're calling it, so you can kind of get to know the characters and the story from the beginning, as opposed to jumping right in at the beginning of when they started filming it and not really having any idea who the characters were or what was going on. And then like one of the people is not with them anymore. He takes off after like 10 episodes or something, or 15 episodes, something like that. So it's, I don't know. I do tend to like Glass Cannon. And I do think if you can like get into it and then you continue to watch like other games with those people, if you like their personalities, that might be enough to get you into whatever it is that they're doing in that particular game. So I believe Mo, who is around, I believe Mo is working on this. Let me put it this way. I'll let Mo give you an answer. Let me put it this way. But I believe you will end up satisfied based on what Mo has told me about his plans to support this particular game. So, I mean, I don't disagree with this statement. However, if you go back to the old stuff, this is much less true. It's clearly in Matt Mercer's kitchen or dining room or whatever. Like they're playing it at somebody's house. They don't have an elaborate camera set up. The audio's kind of dodgy. Nowadays, where they've got an amphitheater and all that. I mean, that's different. Then it feels overproduced and a little weird, because it's like, I don't feel like this is necessarily giving you a good sense of what actually playing an RPG is like for the vast majority of people who happen not to be playing Critical Role with other professional voice actors. This is not a bash on Critical Role or those folks, by the way. I have no problem with people enjoying that material. I'm merely giving you the reasons why I had trouble getting into it. So there was I watched The Guild, and I don't know if maybe there's more of it that I haven't seen, but they did like 2 little seasons of it. It was Felicia Day and basically her friends, who have several of whom have popped up elsewhere by this point. So there you go. Holy shit. 16 hours of video. There you go. You are covered. I believe you will be fine. So 67 videos. Mo gave me I don't know if that number was the final number or what, but yeah, it was like, wow. No wonder we haven't seen it yet. So now again, there's exceptions. And if you're like particularly into a particular game or the people playing it or something like that, that's a little different. I could see that. But historically, I have not really been able to get into watching people play role-playing games on YouTube. It's not a thing I necessarily find interesting. And it's super hard to like step into it and like, halfway through a campaign. I did watch a couple of, I forget who did this. Somebody was running Dangerous Journeys, Gary Gygax's forgotten RPG from the 90s, I believe, from Game Designers Workshop. So, well, Mo is clearly trying to catch up with Jester in terms of video output. So let me talk about what's coming here on the channel. Thursdays have turned into a day when I don't necessarily have anything unless there is an unboxing video. And I don't think I have an unboxing video to push out this week. But I do have that Harn video tomorrow. So if you're interested in that, a lot of people, it was happening before COVID, but the whole situation around COVID and what went down with that certainly was a fact. I mean, you got to think that was a huge factor in the absolute explosion of popularity that people streaming tabletop RPG play saw, right? I do feel like there was an opportunity there for somebody to do that with wargaming too. And, I did a decent amount of it, but not every game I did was necessarily a good fit for that format either. So there's that. Some of them were, but I'm aware of this, but I'm just saying that, you just added 67 videos to your video count. So that's something. My contact with Gary was post Gary working on D&D. Let me put it that way. Most of my own contact with Gary was in the context of Dangerous Journeys, which I was a big fan of at the time. In retrospect, it's got some issues, to say the least. There's some good ideas in it. I will defend it to that extent of Dangerous Journeys, or Mythos as it was more properly called at the time, because what we were playing was the fantasy version, and like the universal system was Dangerous Journeys. It's just that that's the only one that ever came out. A substantial amount of work was done on Unhallowed, which was the modern horror game. And they were actually going to do that first, but then the video game people got involved, and that evaporated as soon as they got tied up in lawsuits. And then they ended up deciding to do the fantasy game first. So this is approximately correct. So what Vox Machina is basically... it's like an animated, well-produced, as far as I'm aware. I have not seen a single minute of it. Fantasy story, animated, based on the Critical Role stuff. Which subset of Critical Role stuff, I don't know. So, I envy doing no editing. There you go. Although to be fair, I'm not sure I got those in my feed, Mo, so I don't know what happened. Maybe you got booted out of the feed because you, launched them all at the same time. All right, hold on one second here. We're gonna address this problem right now, as soon as I unfuck that. Let's see. I'm going to throw the link to Mo's playlist in the chat. So folks want to see the 67 video list of tutorials for Aaron Armor. There they are. So... yeah, they didn't show up in the feed, which is kind of weird. I've never done this way personally, though. So, all right. So, this is very detailed. But I tell you what, doing it like this as short videos, I do think is actually fundamentally a very good idea. That I can say. So, because then you don't necessarily have to commit yourself to like a 2-hour tutorial. So I wanted to learn about morphology, linguistics morphology. And the best thing I could find on it was a 5-hour video that's literally somebody stitching multiple college lectures together. So it's like, it would have been nice to have had the 10-minute version of this, right? So, well, not as short as Bruce may have envisioned, but it's also not tiddlywinks. So... that it is sort of heavy. So I doubt it's as heavy as people tend to think it is, but I'm saying that from the viewpoint of optimism and not from the viewpoint of somebody who's actually checked. So Anyway, but yeah, this week, and I'm not committing to any other videos. The Harn video is already scheduled, but I'm not committing to any of the videos this week because Winterfest Friday, right? So I'm probably not going to be there the minute it opens, but I'll probably be there not too much longer after that because we're going to set up. I'm the guy bringing the plexi. So yeah, I'm a little surprised that they didn't. I think I know why if you did that the way I think you did, Mo, but I can ask that later. So he's on the short one. There you go. No, but this is a tremendous. I mean, there's a tremendous wealth of material here. So good job, Mo, in terms of, and it took a while. I realize that, but man, this is a really exhaustive tutorial treatment for this. So that could be why. I don't know. It depends who you ask, doesn't it? So, in any case, I think we're gonna wrap it a little bit early tonight here, folks, because I've got some stuff to put away and an early departure, like very early departure at this o'clock tomorrow morning. So we will wrap it up for this evening. I'm not sure what else is live on YouTube right now in the wargaming space, but Jester's live, which shouldn't surprise anybody. So if you want to hop over and check him out playing Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is some kind of superhero card game deal that I have zero interest in, go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, we might be back next week if there's going to be a show problem for next Sunday or Monday. Sunday, I think we're going to be okay, but I think the reason why is I think I'm going to come home and do the show because I'm only like half an hour away. So I am going to put a post up and I'll announce it on the social media channels too if I just can't manage to get enough bandwidth from Winterfest, because remember, we're at a new site this year too, to actually run the show. And I can like tune certain settings down so it's a little more forgiving, but I can only do so much. Like last year at Buckeye Game Fest, the bandwidth was absolute nonsense. And I was on like the good network too, not even on the general bullshit hotel network. So, all right, folks, we are wrapping it up. So I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. I want to say thanks to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair and to our good friends at Noble Knight Games, the official sponsor of the Counter Clipping Show. As usual, if you have not yet remembered to like the video or subscribe to the channel, go ahead and do those things. Otherwise, we will see you next week. I tell you what, I will do at least a short spot, might or might not be live, at 8 p.m. next Monday night. And I'll talk about how Winterfest is going. Even if I can't do it live, I can upload from home. So plan on something happening on this channel next week at 8 p.m. this time, same place.